the next step is to see actually how well they are doing, actually, because we read a lot of alarming news that bees are dying out, and then the question is, of course, is that really true? Because then we would be very worried. So if we look at FAO data for the honeybees, actually we're seeing a more positive picture in the sense that actually honeybees are worldwide increasing, or have increased over the last 50 years, odd years, by 65%. And the biggest increases are occurring in Asia, and also quite a steep increase in Africa. And there's a very simple reason for that, because there the number of beekeepers is still growing, because it is attractive to be in the bee business, either for honey production or for pollination services. If we look at the other regions, Europe and North America, yes, we have had in that period our times of honeybee number declines. But also there, the biggest declines were linked to socioeconomic factors. So if the subsidies are withdrawn, for instance in Eastern Europe, Eastern Germany, the subsidies were withdrawn for the beekeeper stepped out of the business, and less beekeepers just means less hives. Again, we look at the hives in total, because as you remember, as Christian explained, we really look at the colony as a big superorganism. They all have their tasks, and the hive is the thing that needs to survive the colony. So in general, I would say no, honeybees are not dying out. The question, of course, then still remains, are they doing well? Because dying out is something different to are they doing well? And that's actually where the most discussion is around, because that we can see and measure when we look at colony losses. So what happens, winter colony losses is something you can measure, and that gives an indication of how strong or weak your colony is, because the bees go into winter, and if they don't come out, then basically they were probably weak in going into that winter. And actually, a beekeeper finds it absolutely normal to lose a certain percentage of his hives over the winter, and 5 to 15% he would not be very worried about. But what we were seeing is that in recent years we saw loss rates in Europe of more than 35%, and also in the US even more extreme of over 50%. And that's the topic that everybody is discussing. How can that occur, and what is the driving cause of that? To make the story a little bit complex is that there is not really a pattern to be seen in all of this decline, because or losses, because we see a lot of spatial and temporal variability. So it can be up in one year in one country and then down again in the next year. But at least what we can say is that there is no correlation between these losses and agricultural intensity, because we see the same kind of fluctuations, for instance, in the Nordic countries where there is little agricultural intensity, as in countries where we see a lot of agriculture, for instance, in France or other countries. And the reason as well that there's not really a clear pattern is probably because there are multiple factors that play into each other. And of course, because of this complexity in factors, that is different from country to country and also from year to year. And that is the reason why we're seeing rather varying patterns. The kind of factors that are affecting bee health are things like pests and diseases. I would say pests and diseases is definitely number one, especially in North America and Europe. Of course, beekeeping practices, because a beekeeper needs to take care of his managed honeybees well, because otherwise there are problems for the bees as well. It's the factor of nutrition and habitat, so how much food is available and how much nesting space is available. It's a matter of weather, because weather plays into nutrition, but of course also plays into things as pests and diseases. It's genetics and agronomic practices, and we'll go into those in a little bit more detail in the next slides. in general, as said, there are some challenges that the bees face in the modern world. And things like intensification of agriculture in some regions have definitely contributed, for instance, in the reduction of abundance and diversity of flowers and nesting habitats in the agricultural space. And then we have things like weather and parasites and diseases, but also lack of suitable nesting sites, agriculture and apiculture practices, and the incorrect use of chemicals that have impacted pollinator health. Generally, the bee scientists do agree that there is this combination of multiple stressors, but that for the honeybee it is really pests and diseases which plays the biggest role. And in particular here it is the varroa mite and the associated viruses. And for the wild bees and other pollinators, it's really habitat loss as the key driver of decline. This point is actually generally supported. Of course, where the whole discussion lies is the relative importance and the interactions of the different factors. And of course, the interaction of those factors are very different region to region. So let's look a little bit at nutrition and habitat. So for honeybees, it's really important, as Christian has already indicated, that they have enough foraging throughout the season. And that's quite a long season, because we only think of our own spring, whatever, but actually we should be thinking a little bit longer into that winter. We need rich plants that are rich in nectar and pollen. That's what the bees need. And what the wild bees really need is specific habitat and nesting structures. And that is, of course, something that we have also seen change as we have made certain decisions in landscape management, where some of the bees are not as happy anymore as they were before. So there we really see that we have a lack of nutrition and habitat, and that is something you can work towards improving. So what the honeybees need, they need carbohydrates. Those are really the energy sources. It's important for the temperature regulation, for hive management, maintenance, for instance. You need to clean, you need to feed, you need to forage, and you need to fly around, and you need energy to do so. And then the proteins are really the building blocks, and they are mainly for the nutrition of the larvae to make them strong. And then I get to pests and diseases, and I hand over to Christian again to enlighten us on the other factors.
Yeah, pests and diseases. What is it that is compromising the health of our honeybees? There's a lot, basically. We focus on some of the most important, which are, in the first place, the varroa mite, a parasite. But there are also other parasites, like wax moth, tracheal mites, the small hive beetle. There are some diseases, mostly caused by fungus diseases, bacteria and viruses, and of course there are predators.